What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that The Fabelmans is no perfect movie. And The Fabelmans is a semi-autobiographical account of Steven Spielberg's childhood. The official synopsis is growing up in post-World War II Arizona from the age of 7 to 18, a young man named Sam Fabelman, played by Gabriel LaBelle, discovers a shattering family secret and how the power of films can help him see the truth. Now, when I heard that Spielberg of all people, was going to direct a movie about his own childhood and where his passion for filmmaking came from, what film nerd wouldn't get excited as hell to see it? When I first heard that this movie even existed, it was one of those movies that I hoped would be a TIFF but probably wouldn't. And then they just accepted it, and from there on, I thought it was going to be, okay, this will be like Dune, a movie that makes me want to go to the festival, but I won't see it until it comes out to the public. And then, after 6 hours of my life that I will never get back, of my dad and I screaming at our computer because of just how fucking incompetent TIFF is when it comes to selling tickets, more on that in a later video, I finally got the ticket. My anticipation just got even higher, which could also be a problem, because even though I never saw a trailer, barely saw any pictures, just knew that one little synopsis, your expectations can get all over the place because you don't really know how the story is going to be told, whether it's going to have the same escapist, optimistic attitude that Spielberg has, or if it's going to be one of his more dramatic and grittier tellings, seeing as how it does revolve around his own personal life. Now that I have seen it, would I consider it one of Spielberg's best movies altogether? Well, I can safely say this. For the first 2/3 of this movie, it features some of the best scenes that Spielberg, some of the best images that he has ever put to film. And then, in the last third, things change, and I'll get into that later. But for the most part, this is a stunningly beautiful love letter to cinema and filmmaking. And it's weird how I thought it was mildly disappointing, but there are so many things that I could just praise the hell out of when it comes to The Fabelmans. Steven Spielberg brings all the same directing tricks that have made him a household name and amplifies them in a way that feels a lot more personal and majestic. Now, I say this a lot when it comes to movies that remind me of Spielberg's directing, let alone when he actually makes one. As opposed to a lot of movies nowadays that feel the need to change different camera angles and change the perspective on a different character every time a person starts or stops talking, Spielberg has found a way to do something that is now known as a Spielberg oneer, where he will take one shot and break it down into multiple camera angles where the camera movement simulates editing as it changes from the perspective of one character to another or merges them both into the same frame. And not only does it save a lot more time during filming where you don't have to shoot in standard coverage, not only are our eyes be able to move back and forth in one frame without having to readjust on every single camera angle that gets exhausting after a while, that kind of camera work feels a hell of a lot more nostalgic because at the time of Spielberg's childhood and in his earlier career, it was just common sense to film things like that because it sells the illusion of film a lot more to film every dramatic, tear-jerking conversation, every awesome special effect in as long a shot as possible so that the audience can sit there and wonder to themselves, holy shit, how did they do that? And that awe-inspiring feeling of what it's like to watch a movie in a dark auditorium is captured perfectly every time Sam directs a movie and then shows it in the auditorium for his Cub Scout class, and seeing his parents and his classmates' mind-blown reactions because they can't believe that Sam was so clever and hardworking to make something that looks almost professional. That just shows how powerful cinema is at being able to transport you into a different world, and how important it is for a director to see their creative vision that they have worked their ass off to accomplish be recognized amongst peers or strangers, especially in a day and age where there were no cell phones to shine in your fucking face. Would love to know what that kind of era was. The scenes in which Sam is directing his own movies with the Cub Scouts, and they come up with so many clever and ingenious techniques to make their movies feel as real as possible. There's one scene where they're in the Arizona desert making a war movie, because it's Spielberg, why wouldn't he make a war movie, where they dig holes in the ground, fill them back with the dirt, and put a plank in between underneath, so that when the actors are stepping on the wooden planks, dirt flies out like it's a landmine. Those scenes were the major highlight of the movie, and they had me constantly smiling because it's the kind of childhood, the kind of adolescence that I wish I had as a kid. I wish that I really regret that I hadn't been able to be as brave as Sam was in order to ask anyone, knock on any door, and raise as much money as possible just to do what he loved. And there are a lot of visual parallels to movies that Spielberg would later go on to make in his career, some of which are easier to spot, others you'd have to have seen his entire filmography in order to spot all of them. I mean, there's one scene where Sam and the Cub Scouts are all uniformly lined up on their bicycles on the street because, well, you know for a fact what shot that's from. And there are more subtle ones like this one prom sequence that literally looks like it was filmed in the exact same gymnasium that Spielberg made West Side Story during the dance-off. And as fan service, it works perfectly well, but it still serves the story in that it shows how childhood memories can serve as filmmakers' inspiration for creating such memorable shots. His longtime cinematographer, Janusz Kaminski, does some of his best work in an already 3-decade-long career, creating some of the best shots that I've seen in any movie this year that can tell one story within a shot with no dialogue whatsoever, particularly this heartbreaking scene where Sam is editing a home movie on this editing machine that he had been begging for, his dad finally gave to him. But when he starts using it on this one particular home movie, he spots something in the background that revolves around his family he never noticed before. And it affects him so deeply that just looking at his face, he feels so conflicted as to whether or not he can bear himself to even make a home movie about it, because if he does, he would have to cut the more tragic stuff out, and it would feel as if he would be lying to his audience. It's weird how Spielberg kind of calls himself out for showing the more optimistic, escapist side of filmmaking, something that he's been heavily criticized for in his career, and point out, yeah, sometimes that is detrimental to the art and the artist. And speaking of which, Gabriel LaBelle as Sam Fabelman may have been one of the best child performances I've ever seen in a Spielberg movie. Which is really saying a lot, considering how many there already are, and the added pressure of having to play the director himself. And I must give credit to the young boy who plays 7-year-old Sam. I'm going to try and get his name right. Matteo Zorina Francis Defford. I couldn't find a pronunciation online. He was really good as 7-year-old Sam during the first 10 to 20 minutes, I'd say, where you really discover where his inspiration for movies and movie making came from and how that obsession instantly just clicked with him. Kid was so great, but LaBelle, because he carries the majority of this movie, his timing, his line delivery were perfectly spot on. I loved seeing the amount of dedication and determination that on one hand makes him such an enthusiastic person to be around when making a movie, but it also can be hard to like him sometimes because he causes a lot of trouble amongst his family members trying to do so. There's this one funny scene where he and his sisters use all the toilet paper in their house to dress up as mummies and make a monster movie. Or the fact that he spent so much time obsessing over this one subject that he barely knows how to talk about anything else. He doesn't have that many good social skills. He's not super confident and brave when expressing his true emotions, to the point where it feels as if the only way he can truly express himself is if he makes a movie, shows it to the people he's trying to communicate this to. Wow, this is really a lot. It's insane that he has to put together a movie to show what he is trying to say. And probably my favorite aspect about his character arc is when he starts to inject his changing perspectives of how the world is, a world that he used to see as completely optimistic and full of opportunities, and starts to inject these darker thoughts that are in his head that naturally give his new movies a more depressing and bleak feel that still that still get the exact same reaction out of his core audience before, that makes you question whether or not he's still making movies for the sake of entertaining himself and others, or if that's his only way of dealing with real life tragedy and trying to get so much pain off of his chest. Something that seems completely futile when the audience, again, gets the exact same reaction out of a movie he made that had a happy ending. It's a lesson that I wish more modern filmmakers would appreciate nowadays, because Spielberg is kind of calling them out for making much more bleaker content for absolutely nothing, because let's face it, that is what's going on right now. In terms of the side cast, it was pleasantly refreshing to see Paul Dano play a human being. In all seriousness, it's a little far-fetched to see him be the father of a high school kid, especially because he's not even 40. I get that he's a lot older than he looks, but it's still a little unconvincing. And he's actually not in the movie as much as you would expect, being the main character's dad. And plus, we all know how much Steven Spielberg loves to talk about father-son relationships in particular, but at the same time, it is nice to see him convincingly play a nuanced and mild-mannered character. So mild to the point where people start to lose interest or walk out of his conversations because they find him incredibly boring, which, I mean, he kind of is. He's a computer engineer, but you still feel bad for him. Even though he's the realistic parent who doesn't always see eye to eye with Sam on a lot of things. And part of his reluctance to support his filmmaking does kind of lead into Sam losing his passion, amongst many other things. And I almost forgot to mention, as bleak as Sam's movies get over time, you do recognize that if he had nothing to drive his passion for making movies, he wouldn't be making movies. And when you do see him temporarily lose passion over a certain period of time, it sucks to see his life be so unfulfilling, especially because his dad, especially when once he loses that passion, his dad stops giving him the resources that he needs because he's the practical realist one, and his mother doesn't support him as much, being the artistic creative parent. Michelle Williams started off pitch perfect as the mother, seeing her support her son's creativity and just how far she's willing to go in order to let him follow his dreams, to the point where she disregards her husband's advice, was absolutely endearing. But then something changes halfway through, and her acting starts to get a little over the top, and it is on purpose to suit the situation, but there are a few scenes where I thought it went a little too overboard, like she was trying too hard with her expressions and her line delivery. If this was Annette Bening as the mom, it probably would have suited her a lot more, because Annette Bening is used to playing so many batshit characters, but still, for the most part, Michelle Williams does maintain being the emotional core of the film as this flawed but still sympathetic character. And it's very clear watching her actions that Spielberg's mom probably serves as the main inspiration for the parental characters in his movies. And in one scene and one scene only, a nearly unrecognizable Judd Hirsch, when I first saw him, I just sat there and went, that looks like him, but it can't be. And then in the end credits, you see his name, and I just sat there and I went, I fucking knew it. In one scene and one scene only, he gives this incredible cautionary tale towards Sam about the dangers of balancing art more than your family, because once you become more passionate, you spend more time working on that and disregarding the other people in your life that can serve as inspiration, can serve for help. Or if you give up on your art entirely to focus on your family, where, yeah, you'll be supporting them, but you won't be happy in your life. It's weird seeing a movie find that nice middle ground where you spend as much time on art and family. Rumor has it Spielberg partially directed The Lost World from his home because his son was sick at the time and he just couldn't leave him. But he also couldn't abandon the project entirely. So seeing those real-life parallels was interesting, but it's still an exciting and hilarious scene because Judd Hirsch is still the eccentric family member that nobody likes to talk about, and his accent is so thick that you can barely understand what he's trying to say half the time, but you understand what he's trying to communicate towards this one family member, so that he doesn't make the exact same mistakes. Now, all these things sound great. What stops The Fabelmans from being a great movie? And for me, it's the last third of the film. It really lost my interest because it spends a lot more time on Sam losing his passion for filmmaking than I was expecting or that I would have liked. And don't get me wrong, it's necessary to show a couple scenes at the very least of just how depressing life is for him, but also explain why he lost that passion in the first place. So you can look at him and scream in your head, snap out of it, find something that can re-spark your imagination. But it's more than 2 scenes. It honestly feels like more than 10 scenes. And the stuff that they decide to focus on instead was nowhere near as interesting. And the worst part is, the tone drastically shifts into something that feels a lot more exaggerated and cartoonish. All the characters that felt like realistic human beings start to act batshit insane in ways that don't make sense. Michelle Williams finds someone to care for when she's not with the family, and whatever you think I mean when I say that, it's not, believe me. Sam gets these bullies that are about as authentic as Stephen King bullies, and it was so campy in a way that wasn't even funny, except for this one scene where they do watch a movie of Sam's, and their reaction led to one of the better scenes of The Last Third. This girlfriend, this fucking girlfriend that everyone in my audience kept laughing their asses off to, I have absolutely no idea why. She was annoying, insufferable. She wouldn't shut the fuck up about this one particular subject, and it's not the same as Sam's obsession. Sam's obsession is something that he works hard, spends a lot of time and dedication, and ultimately becomes a better person, along with being a worse person. It was a complex situation. Her obsession is this one opinion about people that she just spouts over and over again, and I guess the joke is supposed to be that she's ignorant, but it didn't feel like a real person. It felt like a cartoon character. People like her individually are more subtle in expressing their opinions, and in a group are more aggressive and hateful. If you've seen the movie, you probably know what I'm talking about, but it didn't help that the actress was just so over the top. Almost as over the top, maybe even more so as the bullies, which was weird. So yeah, The Last Third really deviated from the rest of the movie, and it stops me from saying The Fabelmans is great, let alone one of Spielberg's best. But it has so many of his best moments: the direction, the cinematography, a forgettable but still decent John Williams score, the performances, the initial themes, and just how great a love letter it is to filmmaking, artistic expression, and grief. Made it all the more worth sitting through. And The Last Third includes a terrific ending from this one cameo I won't dare spoil, but it involves this one real-life event of Spielberg's childhood that I actually knew from high school. And when I found out it was going to be in the movie, and this one director was going to be playing this director too, I just sat there and I went, yes! I left the movie satisfied. Not as much as I would have liked to be, but it was still a really good movie, and I'm hoping when it comes out in November, I can appreciate it more. So for now, I'm going to give The Fabelmans a 3.5 out of 5, but it has 5 out of 5 moments for sure. Guys, thanks as always for watching. If you have seen The Fabelmans, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more festival reviews, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.